Great. Yeah, thank you all for having me out today. So as she said, my name is Isaac Baker. I'm the co-director of Co-op Power. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and how we got into community solar and what's ideally what's going to be possible in your region, and a little bit more about how community solar works. We're really excited that this worked out. I'm actually out from Boston right now, so it was a little bit of a hike, but we are working at a conference all weekend up in Buffalo, this Common Bound conference that the New Economy Coalition is putting on. So we were in the neighborhood, and it was very exciting that this all worked out. So really glad to be here with you all. I'm going to dive right in. So what do I want to do quickly today? And I think we've got about an hour. Does that sound right? Okay, so what we're going to talk about is community shared solar. It can be a little bit complex, so I'm going to try and keep it simple, and hopefully as we get to a Q&A, you guys can start firing questions and we can learn as we go. I've found that's been one of the best ways we've gotten groups to wrap their brain around this concept that's not wholly self-explanatory in a lot of ways. But what I want to go over briefly is Co-op Power, who we are and what we've done over the last 10 years since we were founded. Talk about what community shared solar is broadly as a concept, what it means for New York, what it's going to mean over the next couple of years, the state policy in New York that's come about in the past year that's enabled community shared solar to exist, how we work with communities to develop community shared solar projects to give you a sense of what that would look like, and then we can talk a little bit about next steps in Q&A if folks want to do follow-up. Does that sound good? All right. So Co-op Power is our motto is to be a multi-class and multi-race movement for a just and sustainable energy future. We were founded in 2004, and we have been working in doing community development using renewable energy and clean economy solutions to create new business opportunities and to extend the value of renewable energy and energy efficiency across class boundaries and to create jobs. And so that's the high level of what we've done. And what that has looked like for us in practice is this is under the hood, and this is our structure. So we are a regional energy cooperative founded in large part in the last 10 years based on models in Europe where there are a lot of extremely large, like 40,000 member energy cooperatives that bring buying power together. And in the world of energy, there's two key things, and one is the more things you do together, the better price you get. And two is if you can own it collectively, you can get a better price on it. So owning is good and doing it together is good, and you guys are running a Solarize campaign here, so you know all about how moving together can provide a lot of financial savings. I think you're advertising 20% here. A lot of those same principles apply in community shared solar and in all of the energy work that we've done over the last 10 years. So our structure is that we are legally a cooperative C Corp owned by all of our members who participate. You join and you become one of the now 600 members that we have who are member owners and can come to our annual meetings, can elect board members to participate democratically in our governance structure. And so that is how our business operates. I am a staff member that reports to a board member from each of these regions that we serve. And they meet once a month. Sometimes they call in. If they're close, they all get together. And they provide the direction. And they serve as the point of contact between all of their community members that this represents. So there's one board member who comes in, works with all these folks, and represents their group's interests in seeing what projects move forward and what the community wants to do together as a larger whole. What that has looked like in practice over the last 10 years is a lot of different things. And naturally, when you get a diverse democratic group together, there's a lot of different projects in different communities, and people had different priorities when they came to Co-op Power. So what some of the biggest ticket items we've done is in rural areas, more similar to upstate New York, and where I grew up in western Massachusetts, a little outside of the Northampton area, if you're familiar there. we have a lot of membership there and a lot of folks who either live or rent in single-family homes. So the energy needs that they had were focused around propane, like pellet-fired boilers, and all these various energy needs that you'd have in a rural setting. And so they needed fuel oil. And so we created a lot of businesses there to serve them. So we did community solar hot water installations, where we cut the cost of a solar hot water installation in half by treating it as a barn raising. We'd get 20 people together, they'd all get up there and they'd work with licensed contractors who were overseeing it, and we cut the cost in half, made it accessible to low-income folks, and had a lot of fun doing it in the process, did a few hundred installations like that. So that's one example of kind of crowdsourcing labor and thinking about how we can put these together in fun ways. One of the larger scale projects we've done a lot of green jobs training programs. We run 2 energy efficiency companies that got launched across Massachusetts that each do about $2 million in revenue a year now, where we were training folks who had incarcerated backgrounds and had various barriers to entry for employment, and we got them into entry-level $15 an hour plus jobs, blowing insulation into people's attics, doing things like that. So that was another big project that we did. And we also built a $5 million biodiesel plant in western Massachusetts that takes waste vegetable oil and turns it into cooking oil and turns it into diesel fuel that can be used in tractors and in buses and any kind of boiler that folks use. So mixed at a 20% blend into people's home heating oil. So I'm kind of flying through all these energy things because it's not the focus of the talk, but just to say that we've had a really diverse background in energy over the last 10 years. And then we also ran solarized campaigns, basically, where we would aggregate buyers, and we helped 10 years ago, but back before anyone was doing solar in Western Mass particularly, we helped launch 5 installation businesses, one a worker cooperative, a few others structured different ways, and helped create those jobs, and then helped aggregate the market together and serve them up to those installers so that they had clients to work for. So that was a big part of our early development. Now, in the last 2 years, that brings us to this whole new development in energy that is really changing the way people are interacting and consuming energy right now. And as I think you may have seen, who's seen the headlines for New York of like community shared solar set to explode, right? Like all of that. That's happening in many states. So we're regional to the Northeast, and that's happening in New York, it's Vermont, it's New Hampshire. Maine just tried to pass it, and they have a really tough governor who doesn't love solar, so that didn't work out. But it's really seen as the next way to engage with folks. And show of hands here, how many people think if you get 10 people to sign up for a solarized campaign, how many of them can actually put solar on their roof at the end of the day? What do you think? You think 3 maybe? 4 out of 10? Then you guys are doing great, because I've seen as low as 2 out of 10, depending on which campaign we run. So solar, I think I would say we have a general familiarity with what a solar panel is, right? It's pretty simple, straightforward. I'm not going to get into the technology, because really what community shared solar about is how do we unlock that other 60% of people who might also want to go solar. And really, when you think about it, it's that other 80 to 90% of people, because renters, folks who, they're not signing up for solarized because it's not for them, right? They don't have control over what goes on their roof. They don't have control over the energy they produce. So community shared solar is the ability to put solar panels in one central location. I'm going to dive ahead here. In one central location to get credited for all the power that you produce, and then to distribute it to multiple end users. And the only participation requirement is that you need to be in what's called the same load zone as the shared solar array. So you can't, I can't be in Western Massachusetts building a solar project, try and send you power all the way out here in Western New York. because you have to have agreements with the utility around how that works. So you have to all be operating within the same utility. But assuming you do that, you have a pretty large geographic area that you can spread the value of these solar credits around, basically, and you can have people engage with solar remotely, and then the only requirement is that you all have to pay electricity bills to the same utility and be generally in the same geographic area. And so that opens up this whole market. So why is community shared solar good? Generally what we've seen with solar, it has a lot of the same value propositions of just putting solar on your roof, right? Where you can reduce costs of electricity, you can often fix costs of electricity. You get easier access to solar through community shared solar. You can go through your bill and you don't have to have it on your roof. In many cases, you can make a smaller investment. So it might make sense. It might be hard to justify getting a contractor to come out on your roof and just put one panel up there, right? They might say, we hear you want that, but it's not worth my time to come out. Now, maybe you only want to invest $500 or $1,000 in community shared solar array. That's possible, right? Because you can just buy one panel as part of a larger set of panels that everyone's buying into. So there's the ability to buy at a smaller level, which is valuable. Environmental peace of mind, greening your bill, always a plus in my book. And again, as we said, available to everyone, even if you don't meet that long list of requirements for rooftop solar. Your structure is sound, your roof has been replaced in the last 5 to 7 years, it's not slate, it's asphalt or metal or rubber, all of these things that make solar tough. So this is kind of just going to jump up to the high level of the backdrop to solar, and this applies to rooftop in the same way as community shared solar. Some of the things that make it work really well are a lot of it is financing, where over the last 10 years, banks have learned what a solar panel is at long last. Thank God, right? Because it is hard to run an industry when nobody will make any loans based on it. So there's a growing number of banks, particularly in New York, and New York's gotten a lot of buy-in, especially over the past year, as community shared solar as a concept is growing. So a lot of banks are providing financing. So say you want to make that $1,000 investment in your set of panels, just like on your roof or in a community shared solar array, you can get financing for that. And in New York, I believe as low as like 3.9% or something like that. So it's not bad. Still not quite a home equity loan. You might be able to do better if you do own your home, but overall, there's good access to financing. You can ignore this part. Solar renewable energy credits is kind of on the horizon for New York. I won't dive into it, but when you produce a solar green electron, what happens in Massachusetts and in most other states other than New York right now is that you get what's called an environmental attribute, where the state says, we like that electron you made is green. And so we want to give you a little extra kicker for making that electron green and putting it on our grid. So we're going to credit you with a little invisible piece of paper called a renewable energy certificate. And that certificate is worth money, and you can sell it to the utilities who are polluting and are then required to buy them from you. So what it effectively does is a very complex way of getting the utility to pay you more for your solar electricity that you produce. And it is very complex. But I mention this because New York is considering a renewable energy credit policy right now. They're even considering ZRECs to try and expand nuclear and incentivize aging nuclear facilities in that same way, and they're going to do RECs for solar. So there's a lot going on at that policy level, but the bottom line is if they do move in that direction, it will make going solar even more financially advantageous. They will make the utilities pay you more for your solar production. Virtual net metering. This is this concept that allows for community shared solar. It is does that concept mean anything to anyone in the room? Virtual net metering. So let's cut out virtual for a second. Does net metering mean anything to folks? So that ability to, it's an amazing story, which I shouldn't get into, and I really want to, but net metering was started. I have a whole presentation on this, but I work with limited equity housing co-ops in New York City, and we try to build solar projects on low-income housing in New York City and then provide it to tenants in those buildings is one of the many projects we do. And one of those kind of bootstrap up co-ops actually was the inventor of net metering as a concept in the 70s, where they said, or they didn't actually say, they got a little group together and they threw up a little wind turbine on top of a multifamily building in downtown New York City, and they just plugged it right into the grid, right? They just said, we're just gonna throw this on there. And then Con Ed, the local utility, said, please, like, make them take this down. This is dangerous. Like, we don't understand this. Like, we don't want this to happen. And they, in turn, sued Con Ed and said, no, in fact, you should be paying us because we're producing electricity on your grid, and you should credit us for that electricity that we produce. And in the beautiful David versus Goliath story, they won. And that was the foundation of net metering as a national policy that created renewable energy as we know it. Because this is what's important. Until we have really low-cost batteries, such that when solar produces energy while the sun is shining, you're not in your home, right? You're out at work, you've got 2 lights on, and you've got a few basic appliances running. You're not using those electrons as they're being produced on your roof. So the 2 ways that you can take advantage of those are, one, if you were totally off-grid, you had a battery, you'd collect it all in a battery, and then you'd use it at night when you get home from work. Or you would do what we do right now, which is batteries are too expensive, and so what we do is we use the utility grid as effectively the battery, right? Where we dump our electrons when we're not using them, and the utility says, okay, we'll go use those somewhere else for you. But we're going to pay you for them, and that is net metering. So when you're out and about, they calculate your net metering value, and that's when the meter spins backwards and all of that associated with solar. So I won't go any further into it. It's one of my favorite things in the world. Virtual net metering is the ability to then take that meter spinning backwards. And so what's going to happen, right, is say I build a solar array right outside here. And I don't attach it to the use of this building. So I just connect it to a meter and then plug right into the local utility. My meter is only going to spin backwards, right? Because there's no power is being used. And so if my meter only spins backwards, what's going to happen is that every month I'll generate value on my utility bill, and it'll just show up as this big credit. So I'll be month 1, I got $300. So it says plus 300. Month 2, I get plus $600. And that would be just net metering. And then virtual net metering is the ability to say, okay, but I don't want to, it's like building up credits you can't use, right? So if you get a bunch of these credits, the utility never is going to cut you a check for that value. They don't like doing that. So I like to think about net metering and virtual net metering as the concept of when you buy some clothes and you return them, they don't usually give you cash back. They're going to give you store credit. And that is exactly how utilities work with energy. They will give you store credit. So then this is the ability to distribute your store credit around, to say that I accrues $300, $600, $900 on my one bill, and then I send it to all these other bills, right? I send it to everyone in the room where you guys are actually paying that utility, so then I can put a little plus such and such amount on your bill. And that is the virtual part of it, where it's the ability to spread the value around to a number of different participants in your area. Federal investment tax credit, as we all know, 30% of any solar system, whether it's on your home or somewhere else in your area, gets a federal investment tax credit for 30%. It's a huge part of the industry and the reason solar is kind of affordable and accessible. And that was extended through 2020, so we got 5 more years of runway with that. Over the last 10 years, the costs of solar equipment have come down exponentially. And the costs of electricity that it produces continue to rise. So we're at that beautiful inflection point where over the next 5 years particularly, the costs of producing the solar will continue to come down and the value that it creates will continue to go up. So it becomes a better investment to go solar with every passing day right now. How do we do on that? I covered a lot.
Yeah.
That was okay? All right. So now we're in New York. These were those load zones we're talking about. So what is the name of your local utility here? You guys have National Grid. Great. We have them too. They're everywhere, you know. It's great. So National Grid provides electricity. I believe actually, if my memory serves me, they purchased an old, anyway, the way utilities work, there was a small utility here at one point. Niagara Mohawk, exactly. Okay, so Niagara Mohawk owned all the poles and wires in this area at one point historically. At another point historically, they became financially defunct and probably got bought out by National Grid, like so many other small utilities in the area. We've seen incredible consolidation. So even though National Grid may own, definitely owns load zone F, may own a couple other load zones here, and they do own A, you can't distribute value across load zones because they treat them as whole different utilities. National Grid just happens to own them. But there are like this area, because it used to be Niagara Mohawk and you had 30 years or hundreds of years of net metering and all these like very specific and complicated tariffs and policies around how people can use energy right here. That is not the same as what happened right here. And so even though one utility company bought up multiple ones of these, there are different rules of the game in every load zone because of that. So in order to keep things simple, we stick with one rule book for one area. So load zone A is your rule book. National Grid is your provider. So any project that you wanted to do with community shared solar would have to be somewhere in one of these towns, and all of the people who participated in it would have to also be paying National Grid utility bills somewhere in that load zone.
One question quick.
Yeah.
There's another utility, New York State Gas and Electric, that is in this area, including parts of Chautauqua County.
Oh, interesting.
Do they have their own load zone, or are they like the municipalities that
Are they
have their own
an
load
electric
zone?
utility?
They're another electric utility separate from National Grid.
Oof. Okay. Well, then that makes sense, and that is true. That even within a load zone, there can be multiple utilities. So what that means is that in order for one shared solar project, has to be the same utility in the same load zone. So then, if you cut this in half and you've got one utility here, one utility here, or knowing utilities and the way they do things, it'll be like, right, cut up like that, right? But
So Chautauqua County would need two solar grids, one for National Grid, which is the major one,
yep.
and one for New York State Gas and Electric.
Yep. If you were to have a shared solar project that served everyone in Chautauqua County, you would need to provide it in both utilities.
So hopefully we'll get two sponsors that'll build it so that everybody is covered.
Absolutely.
NICEAG, New York State Electric and Gas.
Nice. Okay. So, so great. We got two utilities, one load zone, and feel free to keep the questions coming as we go. So I'm going to dive a little bit.
Question about the load zone then.
I'm ready.
Could it be a problem that the National Grid could break up these load zones to try to eliminate the ability to use these the garden solar?
These load zones have been pretty fixed. They're hard to change, and you have to go through a lot of, is it the PSC? I'm trying to remember here. They have different names for the regulatory bodies in every state, but Public Service, PUC? The PUC in New York, Public Utilities Commission. So they have to go through a whole, it's like a rate case, or like it would be a whole process.
That's to make sure that if they were to form this, then the National Grid wouldn't just redistribute it in different ways this redistribution in different load zones.
Would there be any reason why they would want to?
It's probably not worth it to them.
It's too much of a fight. I haven't seen it. I've seen utilities over the past couple of years fight solar in every way known to mankind. And this wasn't one of them specifically, but I will tell you about some of the other ways that they do fight it very successfully. It's mostly through the interconnection process. When you're a developer building a solar project and you apply to plug into the grid, so you apply to NYSEG or you apply to National Grid, they can be like, well, we'd maybe let you plug in, but we're going to need $500,000. And that is a very good way to stop projects from moving forward. So and they're allowed to basically, this is now getting into utility policy and like public-private partnerships and like what is a utility, who does it serve, all of those kind of bigger level policy questions around energy. But the basic, the gist for solar is that the way interconnection works is that you apply and you say, I want to plug 50 kilowatts in right here on your grid in such and such a way. And and every time you do solar on your roof or whatever it is, your installer is doing that, is just saying, I want to plug in 10 kilowatts to your grid on this person's roof, right? They're doing that in the background. The consumer doesn't see it, but they have to do that. So when you do that at scale and you say, I want to plug in a 200 kilowatt, they can say, oh, our line isn't really built to support that much energy being backfed onto it from solar. We're going to need $500,000 in order to pay for equipment upgrades to our system. So basically what's going to happen is unless we change that development, our entire electrical infrastructure is going to get rebuilt and upgraded entirely on the backs of third-party developers and solar installers and renewable energy developers rather than by the utility that owns the system. So that's the policy that we have in place for the moment. You had a question?
Well, I thought when the electric was deregulated, that National Grid, they're responsible for distribution, getting the power to the customers.
Correct.
Right? Maintaining the lines, the poles, all that. They are not producing. They have to buy the electricity from another producer. So
Right.
they would not ever want to challenge, if they want to buy it at the best price they can get it, right?
Right, and the utility model is made around large-scale, centralized production of energy. So it's in the utility's interest for us to have single natural gas plants kicking out huge amounts of energy in one place and then distributing it out and about. And that's how they've learned how to make money over the last 150 years. And this whole model of putting little energy power plants on everybody's rooftop and in everybody's community is very confusing to them, is foreign to them, requires a lot of adaptation of their business model, and net metering is a potential threat to their business model, because if you put solar on your roof and you can zero out your bill, right? You can effectively pay nothing to the utility over the course of a year, and they just lost a customer. That is money that they are no longer receiving to pay their shareholders their fixed rate of return that they are trying to earn. So
They still charge you delivery fees.
Yeah.
they do. So but it depends. It's all state to state. So it depends on what the arrangement is with solar and how.
Your delivery fee is probably going to go up significantly because of that.
Yes.
And like he said, they're going to base their system on the backbone of the solar producers, whether it be individual or group, so that they, in order to support their grid. And that means upgrading to make the connections or just to make up that difference of loss. They're gonna because of losing the customer, they're gonna have to make up the difference somewhere, they claim, and they would want to then probably eventually will start hitting you for your connection fee. I would assume.
But I don't see how they're losing you as a customer. You are the customer buying for their delivery.
Right, and they're gonna charge you more because you're not buying the electricity.
They can't sell you the electricity.
Well, I see what
They
you're
can't
So,
generate it.
so net metering in my understanding of it, because in
Oh, I see
New
what you're
York,
saying, right.
you have full retail value net metering. So 1 kilowatt hour of solar, if you're paying 12 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity, 1 kilowatt hour of solar is also worth 12 cents. And so effectively, you can actually zero out your bill, is my understanding of in New York, where if you produce the same amount of kilowatt hours in a year that you, as you would use, if you produce that on your roof, your bill will be zero.
I think what he's saying though is that it shouldn't affect anything with the grid with us. It should affect the actual, energy would bend down to the producer.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Right.
It's not
It
gonna
wouldn't
affect,
affect
it's
National
affecting
Grid.
them, not the delivery company that owns the grid itself.
Right.
Because they're now separated.
But for a fact, many communities are putting in community solar, so how are they
It's a good point.
doing that?
So so let's look into this, right? So what I can't, I don't have my full analysis done, but I'll just show you. Basically, you look here up, and you're looking at 12-cent electricity. And this is really important because this dictates how solar gets developed. In Massachusetts, we have Boston is 22-cent electricity, and it goes down the farther west you go. So I live all the way west, and we're about 14 cents. And the closer you are to our big city, 22 cents. So same thing, right? Here's your big city, 25-cent electricity, and going up. That's New York City, right? Hudson Valley area, 18-cent electricity. Pretty expensive, kind of rural. So there's a lot of access to land, places to put large solar arrays, relatively high electricity costs at 18 cents. This is the sweet spot for community shared solar. Of the couple hundred community shared solar applications that have gone in, right here, all of them, right? Because you're a big developer coming in, sizing up a state, this is where you want to be because you get the most bang for your buck, and it costs the same amount to put up a solar panel here as it does here, but it's worth 60% more right here. So and New York is not moving very quickly, even though it has high electricity costs, because it's impossible to do construction in New York City. And you got to pay off God knows who, right, in order to get it done. So 12 cents. So what you're going to see is there are, have you guys heard of Cypress Creek by any chance? The company single-handedly responsible for all of the mayhem around land leasing and everything that's going on in upstate New York right now. So I think I just saw on my email there have been 300 project requests for community solar or large-scale solar interconnection in upstate New York in the last 6 months, and over 150 of them have been Cypress Creek, and another 100 was Solar City, the two largest developers, and then there were a few tiny ones. So if you think about how democratic this process is, we're not moving that far away from the big central large money approach to energy right now. Those are both very, very large multinational companies that are going to get bought out by Tesla in the course of the next year. The moral of that story is basically what's happening right now is that Cypress Creek and Solar City, large developers, are going around to all this area, and they're saying 12 cents for electricity, that's not that exciting. But we think that community solar is going to grow and it's going to be of interest moving forward. And we have enough money that we're willing to go and pay farmers to lock up their land with a lease for 20 years just to hedge our bets, see what happens. And so that's what's happening right now. And this is called the land grab, right? Similar to any kind of energy development, natural gas development, all the rest. They're just going around and saying, I see your 50 acres, you're not doing much with that. How's this much money? And anyway, this is one of the things that the sadder part of this work. I know I have sat down with folks at Cypress Creek who are celebrating just pulling the wool right over farmers' eyes, right? And it's the same story as natural gas, where if farmers aren't educated, if landowners aren't coming together, when they're in the face of these large for-profit developers basically just mailing land leases out all across the state, if they're not organized, they are not going to know the value of their land for solar and basically market rates and be able to get a fair price. There are standard prices per acre that are being paid all across the Northeast, and if you don't get that price, it's tough. You should get a good price for it. So anyway, I don't want to dive too far down that direction because we don't do those large scale 2 megawatt, like 10 acre arrays. I'm going to tell you a bit about our model afterwards, but that's kind of the backdrop of what's going on across the state. So are we good on that piece? All right, I'm going to tell you a bit about us. Basically, our model is that our in-house staff is very small. I work with my partner, Ben Underwood. We've been doing renewable energy for the last 5 years. I helped launch our biodiesel plant. We do anaerobic digesters, turning food waste into electricity and into compost and all kinds of fun community-based renewable energy stuff. We have a CEO who's done cooperative development for the last 40 years all across the Northeast, helping co-ops get started. And so we have a number of other folks who work in Co-op Power and in biodiesel, energy efficiency, and all the rest. But this is our community solar team. And what we do is that we partner. So we have tons of, we don't actually build projects, but we provide the legal and financial vehicle that allows communities to come together to own a project together. And then we help them get a really good price for building it. So we have installers that we've worked with. We have legal folks that have drafted up all of our documents. We have financial consultants who have pored over every detail and made sure that all of our assumptions are right. And then we work with a lot of nonprofits all across the Northeast and small groups who are doing solarized campaigns, things like that. So Solar One runs solarized campaigns in New York City. We work with the Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition in Binghamton, who runs solarized there. So we partner with a lot of folks doing solarized because they're the ones who are interested in getting the word out and making solar happen in their community. So that has been our model. This is gets into our development principles of how we do renewable energy. As we've said, we believe better together. Community-led planning and development. One of the things that does not mean, right, is pulling the wool over a farmer's eyes over 50 acres and just seeing how much money you can make out of that, right? So bringing the community together, that landowner, the people who want to participate, having them all decide where it's going to go, what are our values when we think about solar. I could spend a whole lot of time talking just about that, but we've had hours of conversation about where do we believe solar should go, right? Like if the community's at the table, where do we think solar should be? Should it be on prime agricultural land? Should we be chopping down 200-year-old trees in order to put up solar panels? People have a lot of feelings about those two questions. And in Massachusetts, which is about 2.5, 3 years ahead of New York in its solar development timeline, we've already had the boom. So we're up to 5% of the state's electricity is being produced by solar panels as of today. And it is like exponential increase right now, bumping up against the state's caps every month. So New York is set to do that over the next 2 years and to start launching because of all these policies they've put in place. So the question is, once you have all this land being converted and we're changing our energy system right as we speak, right now, how do communities have a voice at the table of what will be a huge construction planning and development process, right? Like that's what we're thinking about right now. So what makes sense for communities, all that. We bring communities in from the start from all of our projects, and our model is contingent on community buy-in from day one. We've never had a single, the two permitting, basically the biggest risks to solar development that hang up large for-profit developers are permitting and permitting. So if we have had examples where we have partners who came in and tried to lease some land and the community didn't really want solar there, and they're being hung up with the Conservation Commission, who is defending every newt that may walk across that land through the conservation approval. If you don't get community buy-in from day one, that can hang you up, and that costs that costs so much money if you're trying to build a project together. So having a project that's a win for the community that can get easily permitted by the planning board and by the local conservation commission is hugely important. The next piece is interconnection. We build small projects. So when you want to build a 2 megawatt, 10 acre project, the utility, as I said, might say, oh, you can plug it in, but you'll have to pay us $500,000. We build projects 200 kilowatts and under, so that's about an acre and smaller. And what we've seen across the Northeast is that's a level that that utilities are a little more willing to play ball with, and it doesn't cause as much upheaval in the layout of the grid. So we build smaller projects, and it changes depending on each state, but in New York, your incentives run up to 200 kilowatts for small commercial. So we build anything probably from 50 to 200 kilowatts is the ideal size for one of our community solar projects. I didn't quite get through all of this because we're multi-class, multi-race. At our mission, making sure that our projects are accessible and are affordable is important. So we look for financing options on all of our projects, try to make sure that folks who don't have $5,000, $10,000 up front can still participate in some way if they want to. And then, of course, local dollars, local cents. We're an energy cooperative. We're trying to build community, build value in the community. So that means if we're gonna, most of the cost of the system goes to the contractor who builds it. So choosing that contractor, maybe choosing a little to pay 10% more to pay somebody who's working in your community, creating jobs in your community, spending that money back in your community, maybe is worth the extra 10%. So that's something that we typically do, and obviously since we spent all this time starting all these electrical contracting businesses and solar businesses, it's important to us. And we also want folks to own it locally so that it's a reliable and resilient project so folks can own their system. What this comes down to, the branding is still up for debate. I like microbrew as a concept, but basically we build these neighborhood net metering projects. So if you think about these 10-acre large community solar projects that you're going to see develop in New York, we like to build more of a neighborhood scale. So our business model, and it's matched to our resources. So in order to build those 2 megawatt facilities, you have to be really big, and you have to have a lot of money to gamble with. And we are not that. We act as a not-for-profit on behalf of our members. We don't have $1 million sitting in the tank just waiting to go and gamble on land leases and a 5-year bet about what might happen with solar policy. That's not our space in the market. So we do 100% participant-funded projects. That would be anywhere from 5 to 20 people can get together and participate in a community shared solar array. What Coop Power does is we provide the mechanism for people to own things together. So the cooperative model, but I won't get into this because this is a whole other piece, but owning things together is legally difficult. And co-ops make it easy to do. That is the short version of that. If you have an LLC and you have people try to own that together, you have securities compliance issues and all of that. So I won't dive down that, but you become a member of the co-op, you own it together, you have a mechanism for having participation in the project and in its development through your shared membership in the co-op. We lease some plot of land on behalf of the community for 20, 25 years. Maybe that's about an acre in your community. And then we bring those 5 to 20 people together around each project, depending on how big it is and how much power each person, how many panels each person needs to fit their own energy bills. As I said, up to 200 kilowatts for New York is the optimum for getting the maximum value on your system. So you want to build as big as you can while receiving the most state subsidies. That is the solar game right now, and 200 kilowatts is the name of the game for New York. And basically the value that you receive is that you get the federal tax credit on, so if you purchase $1,000 worth of solar panels, you get the federal tax credit worth 30% of that, and then you get all the power that it produces. So we're going to produce it on site. We're going to get 12 cents a kilowatt hour for it, and then we are going to tell NYSEG or National Grid to take 12 cents per kilowatt hour and to slap it on your bill. So every month you're going to see 12 cents times the amount of power that your panels produced are going to show up on your bill. And so that's how that works, even though it's not on your roof. So that's the virtual part we were talking about. So your financial payback is you have the upfront cost of the system, and then you get the federal tax credit and the value of the electricity over time for 20, 25, 30 years, depending on how long these things last. And there's also a state tax credit that helps when you're going solar on your own roof. It does not apply for community shared solar, unfortunately. It is written very specifically into the law that says for stuff that's built on your property. I think it's an omission, but for now, that's what we're stuck with. So that's basically how we're feeling on that at a high level.
Can the NYSERDA load zone credits apply to shared solar?
Say more about the load zone credits.
NYSERDA offers an incentive. Right now it's 40, last I heard it was 40 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yep.
And is that, can be credited to shared solar as well?
Correct. And so similar to what happens when you go solar. Oh my God, I forgot to build that into the next slide. I knew I was missing something. Yes, basically what's going to happen, same as going solar on your roof. Your contractor says it's going to cost you $3.50 a watt to go solar. We're going to go get this rebate from NYSERDA for 40 cents. So the effective cost to you is $3.10, but that incentive goes to the installer. Same thing would happen in this model.
That was my question, thank you. So the installers can do that for the shared gardens as well as the individual sites?
Yep.
Can you have as many of these individual up to 200 kilowatt gardens as the community would like? I mean, as in many groups, as they, or is it just like one? In this, how many in the load zone that we're talking about, or is it I mean, because you said up to 200 kilowatts, for what area? Is it, I mean, or can you have? Is that just like one community can have just one solar garden kind of thing up to 200 kilowatts, or can you know, just groups of 20 people, then another group of 20, another group of 20, another group throughout the entire community? Because
The latter.
right.
Yep.
Okay, so they can, because it's I mean, because essentially that's one very large solar garden if you have them close enough to each other. I mean, you just happen to be groups of 20 people.
Right. And now you're playing the solar game, though. And
So it's just this, the game that they were basically forcing you to play in order to get, I mean, because essentially you could have a massive field of them that just owned by individual 20 people for this, depending on how many.
And just to address that very quickly, so typically what happens, and I haven't looked deep into this for New York yet, we got our lawyers checking it out right now, but basically in Massachusetts, you're allowed to have one net metering facility per tax parcel. So what that means is you can have one solar project on one legal parcel of land, and that was their way of trying to limit this game that's getting played.
So as a community, if you had a very large lot, you would then just
Subdivide it.
Subdivide it into each 20 people group would then have a lot in their name.
The problem with that is that the lines may not be able to take that. Right. Which is what a big solar project is talking about.
But you
Would
get
connect in.
Right.
But you get to permit it incrementally. So what's going to happen, and what we see is that you put your first 200 on, and they say, well, we can take 200, that's fine. And then you go the next lot over, and you do your second 200. They're like, okay, we're bumping up, but we can still do it. And then you apply for your third set of 200, and they're like, no, it's going to cost you all this money. We've already got existing solar on the grid right here.
Okay, so then what does the community do?
Then a community,
Did it first before everybody else does it.
boom.
Look for another lot.
Or look for another lot.
Another lot, yeah.
You find another line.
Oh, we're near different lines, which is so
Yep.
something that can take them.
Yep. And what you're looking for, I should say, is a three-phase line. Who knows what three-phase power is? All right. Do you want to explain? Okay. So simple version, right? We can't see anything outside. I have photos on my computer, but simple version is you see power lines. If you look up at the top, you're going to have standard residential power lines. You've got one line running across the top. That's a single phase power line, okay? So you got one little black cable looping right across the top, and then you're going to have like internet and TV and different single black cables running below it. And so that's how that works. Now, if you have three-phase power, you have 3 lines running across the top of each pole. So there's going to be what's called a metal spreader bar that keeps those 3 lines from touching each other. And the 3 lines are going to run across the pole. And so that's how you know. And if you're like me, you'll start everywhere you drive just looking up and seeing what's going on up there, right? It's always scouting, right? That's important.
So big things that march across the field, I'm assuming are 3-phase lines.
The ones that march? I know power to do a lot of different things. I haven't seen that before, though. Yeah.
The big transmission.
Okay.
We have a pole and several lines.
So that would be yet another scale, and you can't plug into that. So transmission lines are owned by even larger entities and are very, very high voltage lines. So the way power works is that it comes in on those big transmission lines from those big natural gas facilities that we talked about, or the coal facilities, or whatever it is, and then they go to substations and they get brought down to 3-phase lines and single-phase lines that serve at lower voltage levels. So 3-phase in rural areas, the best way to know where you have 3-phase is to find your dairies. So old dairies required higher power electricity in order to serve their chillers. So even if those dairies have now gone defunct, at some point those dairies required high voltage power in order to serve their chillers. The utilities built them, and they're still there, regardless of whether or not the farm is there. So in rural areas that don't have a ton of ton of manufacturing or things that are still in place, dairies are the way in the Northeast that you're going to find the legacy of 3-phase power, basically. And otherwise, you're just going to have single-phase for most standard residential.
Okay, going back to the state tax credit, he said is not available to co-ops, to community solar,
Yep.
because they don't own the property. What if a member of the co-op owned the property?
So you get into, it might work for that one person. That's been my guess, is that if you have 20 people and the array is located on that one person might be able to make the case that their share of the panels located in the array that they purchased are technically on their land. However, the co-op leased the land, so it's actually not their land anymore in the eyes of the IRS and all that, because the co-op leased it. So for simplicity's sake, I would say no state tax credit for now. But you do get the 40 cents from NYSERDA, you get the federal tax credit, and you get full retail net metering. And I'd like to see the state tax credit move, but it's a kind of longer-term policy question for the moment.
Do you not get full amount net metering if it's on your roof?
You do.
Okay.
But what's exciting, so I say full retail net metering with like a glint in my eye, because in Massachusetts they just cut it to 60%. So it is rather depressing that happened. So they said if it comes from an off-site array, we're only give you 60% of the full retail value of electricity for it. So New York is still a nice place to work because they've maintained the full value of your net metering credit, even if it comes from a virtual location to you.
How soon would you see this going into effect in New York State?
Community shared solar?
No,
Or
60% going from
The group co-ops
so we're moving now, basically.
right now?
Yep, so we've got folks in Binghamton that just submitted their first interconnection. We've got New York City. We're aggregating those rooftops I was telling you about. Those are our 2 main pieces. We've got folks an hour and a half southeast of Binghamton. I'm forgetting the name of the town. Yep, NYSEG Load Zone E. That's how I categorize everyone in my head. They've got a group together, they've got a site, and they just called me 2 weeks ago and are ready to roll. So the answer is that it's happening.
So if we got 10 people together, we're set to go?
Correct. Yeah. So, and I want to make sure you understand the financials of it before you get too excited, right? Because we got that's an important piece of it. But yes, if you get 10 people together and you want to work with us through our development process, the key piece is also finding the site. So, as you saw, our team has 3 people on it. We partner with communities, and one of the things we don't do is pay a lot of money and take on a lot of overhead to go and scope out those sites and bring them to communities. So we tell communities, here's the boxes you have to check, and here they are. So we do trainings basically once a month that people can participate in on site or virtually, where you can get like this is just the high level on it, but I do a 2-hour like here's everything you need to know, here's all your questions answered, here's how you as a community can build one of these. What that means is 5 to 20 people, right? Everybody getting an average about 5 to 6 kilowatt hours usually is what covers the average homeowner in New York or in the Northeast. So you get 5 to 20 folks together and you build anything from a 25 kilowatt site to a 200 kilowatt site. In New York, because you can go up to 200 kilowatts and still get that same awesome NYSERDA rebate, bigger is better, right? Because as the bigger you go, the lower the installation costs. So if you're at 25 kilowatts, the contractor might say, we'll build it for $320, $350 per watt. And if you tell them, please go build us a 200 kilowatt array, they might say, oh, that sounds good. How about 250 or 280? So you can see for the same panels and the same value that you as a consumer will receive, the closer you are to 200 kilowatts with our model, the better bang for your buck you are getting. So if you can find that full 1.5 acre site, which isn't that big a site, you can build 200 kilowatts and get a really good cheap install price for your panels. So what are we getting right now for a rooftop through your Solarize campaign? $290, $295. Okay, well that's awesome. And I forgot that we're in New York and you got, yeah, anyway.
Our 2 installers have been very good because the idea, we're almost right at what our goal was, even though it was a low for the number of installations. But they again thought we would be able to draw in more because we really had hoped it would go countywide, but it's mostly concentrated in our pilot area.
So
Maybe next, if somebody will run it another year, we could expand it to the county. Somebody could expand it.
someone with more energy than I, right?
Somebody younger than I.
So then that's
Many
really
of us who have worked so very hard.
absolutely. And the Solarize campaigns, they don't run themselves. You know, I know very well. So then you've got, if you just imagine a pricing tier, you're looking at 5 to 10 kilowatts for rooftop is going to be at $290 right now for you through the Solarize campaign. You go up to 25 kilowatts, maybe you're down to $280. And you go up to 200 kilowatts, maybe you're down to $2 or $220. So you can actually get that install cost down a lot the bigger you go. And this is more similar to, it's because it's small commercial, right? So you kind of are dealing in a different ballgame of solar for the cost per watt. So that's the general idea. And then if it's ground mounted, which most of these I imagine would be because it's cheaper, the basic things that we do are to find a good site. Obviously, you can't have it covered in trees, so you got to have good solar access. You need to be set back from basic buildings and roads, right? You can't build it 3 feet away from an existing road or from an existing house. You usually want to build new construction, right? Set back a little bit, and then environmental permitting. No newts, no endangered species, no any of that. And 100 feet away from any wet areas, and if it's even moist, like in just the springtime, count on it being classified as a wetland. So stay away from moist clay type areas, and 200 feet from streams and riverways. These are not, these are like county by county environmental permitting laws, and they're different every which way, but so this is my back of the envelope guide to generally avoiding a lot of hassle and mayhem. So you're looking for a dry, flat piece of land, maybe an old hayfield, whatever it is, that's sitting right next to that three-phase line going to that old dairy, right? That is the site. And if it's roof mounted, we have seen these happen in a rural area like yours. You wouldn't really want to do it, but if for some reason, because most people, if they've got a good site for solar to put on their roof, they should just use the power right there, because they're probably doing something that made them build a giant roof. They're probably using electricity somewhere in there. But if for some reason they wanted to put it on their roof, receive a lease payment for leasing their roof to the community and not use the power but send it back out to the community, we do that, and we've seen that happen before. So then you have the same things you have for solar, where you need to have a strong building that can structurally handle having the weight of solar panels on it and snow loading and all those kind of things. And it needs to be under 5 to 10 years and be asphalt or rubber. That's a lot of the value of doing this, is that what Co-op Power staff is going to provide is that we build, what I do is I create the financial model. So I say, here's how much we need to charge such that we can pay all the contractors and reasonably keep this thing running for 20 or 25 years. So whoever we choose to install it, and who's your local residential installer?
Solar Liberty,
So let's say
CIR, both very local.
So let's say we get one of these folks to bid on it. The way we typically do it is we say, and I just did this morning, sent out one of these, and so we say, okay, Solar Liberty, CIR, here's the building specs, here's what the roof looks like, we want you to build it, the community's ready to buy it. What's going to be your cost per watt to install the thing, and then also, what's your workmanship warranty? Are you going to guarantee its performance for 10 years and then we're on our own after that? Or how long is that built into your install price? And then for that next 10 years, will you give us a contract that we can pay you to then continue to basically extend your workmanship warranty? So that's how we guarantee performance, and it does cost a little bit. So what that means is that we try and keep costs as low as possible, but there are shared costs that the array accrues every year, right? It has to pay taxes, not very much, but a little bit. It has to pay for operations and maintenance. It needs to pay for an inverter replacement in year 12, and it needs to pay insurance. It takes on liability insurance. So we wrap up all of those costs and say, for every panel you produce, you're going to have to pay this much in on a quarterly basis in order to keep the thing running. And these are all costs that if you put it on your roof, that you effectively incorporate into your home. So we're just externalizing that to another business. But when you put it on your roof, the solar has to get built into your homeowner's insurance, so you're still paying a little more insurance for it. You're paying to hop on the phone anytime something breaks and you've got to go find someone to get back up there. And you're paying for the inverter in year 12 when that needs to get swapped out, those kind of things. So we build all that in together and then bill everyone their kind of equal share of that cost. And again, we don't charge a profit margin on that. We just charge our costs of our staff fulfilling those responsibilities on behalf of the community.
As our campaign, the second phase, we did get proposals from our two selected local installers to build about a 200 to 250 kilowatt system in Chautauqua County
Mhm.
for 10 to 12 people. And we were very optimistic, but it fell apart. Okay, one of the major concerns that led to a ban in the area for anything but rooftop residential is the moratorium, excuse me, a moratorium, not a ban, thank you for the correction, was the decommissioning cost. So if after 20, 25 years, this is no longer operable, or the co-op, whatever the model is, falls apart,
Yep.
do you build into your cost for the end cost of decommissioning?
Absolutely. So when we sign that 25-year lease with the landowner, the full removal of the project is, we legally take that on. That's our responsibility. We do. So we do not put that on the landowner, right? And so there's scrap value in these things. So that's a lot of what we assume, is that a lot of the cost of removing it gets recovered through the scrap value of all the various silicon, and there's like a pound of silver, in one of these big arrays, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. So there's some scrap value there, and then we build in a little bit of cost in that to account for removing it. And also the way those leases are typically structured is that if the company becomes insolvent, so if Coop Power were to go default and not be able to continue to operate the array for whatever reason, anyway, that's getting really far into the legal weeds, but basically whoever took over responsibility for the company or inherited it or whatever would be financially responsible for the removal of the property. So, but it's a big concern, right? Because we don't want to have abandoned equipment just scattering our fields all over the place. So absolutely.
That's what we wanted to be able to tell the communities, this is covering the municipalities. People that are concerned where, as this gentleman said, where we want one here and we don't want too many of them, and then, who's going to clean it up when it's just sitting? We have a lot of empty buildings in our area, that have been abandoned and just rotting, and so who's responsible for taking them down, things like that.
Absolutely. And one of the benefits of these shared solar arrays that make them a little more flexible than like a big building is that the shared solar array is plugged into electric grid and can be sold the value to anyone in that area. So the likelihood of that small business effectively falling apart is pretty low, because if one person can't pay, you can go and replace them and find another person to then sell the power to. So you have a lot of resiliency to continue to market your goods, basically.
If we were to approach someone that had a large, very huge roof as a farm industry, would it be more economical for them to put it on their roof or on a field?
It's kind of
Have
a
experience doing that?
Yeah, so there's a break point. So it depends on how big the roof is really the answer. Where up to a certain point, basically for 50 kilowatts, 100 kilowatts and under, it's cheaper to throw it on the roof because you have an existing structure. So you don't have to put as much metal in the ground. And so but when you put it out in the field, you got to pay to pile drive posts into the ground and then hook metal racking onto it. If you do it on a roof, you're basically just screwing in the racking part without the pile driving and land clearing and grading and all that other stuff. So the short answer is that it can be pretty cheap for a rooftop at scale. So if you have an acre and a half of rooftop somewhere, if you have it, great, right? That's awesome. If it's relatively smaller, it depends. But anyway, rooftop can be pretty affordable.
What would a group pay somebody for a lease for that kind of structure to borrow it for 20 years?
So basically, that just gets into the business model, right? Where we're deciding that lease payment is one of your expenses, right? That you're going to take on as a group. So the question is, how long a payback timeline do you want to have on your investment? Because the more expenses you accrue, the longer it takes for you to pay back your investment in solar, right? So the answer is that it's flexible. What I would say, using back of the envelope numbers, is that it's not a huge amount, right? And this is what people are always interested in. I get towns and municipalities being like, our transfer station just closed and we want solar lease payments, right? What can you do for us? So the answer is that it's about $10,000 to $15,000 per megawatt. So $10,000 for a megawatt, you divide by 5 down to 200 kilowatts. So an acre and a half, maybe $2,000 would be $2,000 to $3,000 for a really low electricity value area like where you are. You're going to be on the low end of that lease payment. So probably around $2,000 per a year for an acre and a half. But again, the more you pay, right, the longer the solar timeline is. So the community needs to kind of come together and figure out, based on our specifics, what do we feel like is going to be fair? That's going to give them good value back, but is going to make it affordable for us to be able to invested solar. So it's a,
We want to call you after your weekend in the Buffalo area here and say, I've got 14 people already who want this. What would your co-op, I don't know what you are, Power,
yep.
cost us to say, get a model ready for us? We think we have a site, we'll let you know, but how do we get it done? Because we don't know enough to do it. Will you do this for us? And what would it cost us?
So the cheapest way for us to do this, which is the kind of in the next steps part of this, is that I am giving a virtual training on July 21st at 6 p.m. That I can send you all the invite to.
Please do.
That is the best way for invite anyone who wants to participate, learn more about how we do it. We'll go through the specifics of cost and how we do it. Since we're a nonprofit developer, we ask for the communities when they come together to pay for some of that exploration, basically, as they move forward, but we don't charge a lot. So that's for, and again, this is basically developing kind of recently, so I have to be honest and say that I don't even really know, because I'm still trying to figure out how much it's going to cost me in order to do this. And we've got communities from Maine to New York to Western Mass to Eastern Mass, so it might be very cost effective for us to provide this value to a ton of communities. And so we might not need to charge anything, just to tell you what it's going to look like.
So if you can email us a contact for that training session, and everybody here, we don't have an attendance sheet here tonight, we know most of you, but to contact, I don't know how we would do it on our website. We have an email, Solar Chautauqua email.
July
Email
21st.
us to say I'm interested in co-op.
No, it's going to be in Western Massachusetts.
Oh, Western Massachusetts.
So it's going to be
You have to
out.
do it on the internet.
Is it interactive?
It's
Or are you just presenting and we watch it?
it's going to be on kind of a Skype equivalent, so you can ask questions at the end, and that's how we're going to do it. And I will leave some business cards if folks want to get in touch. Yes.
Versus, in contrast of leasing the property, a group of people, I mean, agricultural land here goes for about 1,500, 2,000 an acre.
Right.
Just purchase it.
Yeah. So.
People do that. That way you're only, in 2 years, it's paid.
Instead of leasing it, right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and again, my 10,000 to 15,000 a megawatt, that lease payment model is really based on Massachusetts, where higher value of electricity, things like that, so you can afford to pay more, and land's a little more expensive. So I'm still kind of adjusting to the upstate New York model, and the community that I was talking to an hour south of Binghamton said the same thing. They're like, oh yeah, we're just going to buy it. It's land in upstate New York, right? Like that'll pay for itself in no time. So I would say, yeah, that's probably the simplest way to do it for communities.
One of the things you may not know, though, is there's a lot of large penalties right now, and I know the Farm Bureau and different places are trying to work it out, whether we're gonna penalize any agricultural code for taxing.
Yep.
You'd have to pay a huge penalty to convert it to an energy field instead of a agricultural one. And so that's where, what Cypress Creek was offering, would they pay the penalties, would they do this and that, you know, and so
Right.
there was a lot of unknown things, so we're getting there.
No, and
Yeah.
So
It would be nice if it wasn't an agricultural farm, just a nice big flat
that's what I was
field.
just
Yeah.
gonna ask you, but if there's a penalty,
That's what I was just-
when he mentioned agricultural farms, will it be a dairy farm, you're saying there's a penalty,
There may be,
but we don't
it's
know
still
yet.
unknown.
If-
Depends
no.
on whether it's already
take it
being
out of the
used as
agricultural
agriculture.
tax.
That's right.
there is.
Agricultural land gets a tax break,
Right.
okay, substantial one over the years.
Yep.
If you take it out of agricultural production,
Yep.
you convert it to something else,
Energy.
Yep.
okay? You're gonna get, or development comes in, right, you're gonna get nailed with a substantial penalty.
Yep.
One, your taxes are gonna go up to begin with, but two, they're gonna recoup some of that, what do I wanna say, discount you've been getting over the years.
Right.
Because this part of the country, I mean, they're very adamant, they wanna keep as much agricultural land in production, in agriculture.
Right.
But at the same time, a farm may have agricultural land, it may own some land which is not useful
Yes.
for agriculture, actually.
Right.
A hillside or
Right.
a
Right.
an area.
And that's
Depending on the soil.
And that's exactly what we submitted for our first interconnection over in Binghamton. Is a beautiful. We've got a farm, tons of acreage, and he's just right behind his house has this like perfect like 10% grade south-facing. I could go on, right? And it's not. There's no farming, right? It's basically just his backyard, right? And it was not in an agricultural easement, which is important, right? Two kinds of, now we're getting into land use, right? Which is one of the fun things about energy and all this stuff is you get to touch all the fun things about how the world works, right? And one of them is agricultural and forest easements we've also seen. So you can get easements for both, and you got to pay penalties for pulling it out of that. So that's part of that land lease payment. Ideally would be substantial enough to cover whatever their penalty costs are. Or when you buy it, you build that penalty cost into the purchase price. So it's not just $2,000 an acre, maybe it's $2,000 plus penalty.
So I also wanted to ask about brownfields, about using brownfields, and what your experience has been with that.
Brownfields are great. I don't like working with municipally owned land. So it depends on. No, because I love the idea of it, but the practice of it is that municipalities are a huge pain to work with and take forever to get anything done. And this is from someone who loves direct democracy, as evidenced in our cooperative structure.
Ask you how a municipality would actually work in that. I see you're working with individual people in the community. You mentioned working with specifically with municipalities or schools. How would you fit into that?
So schools, pay even lower electricity costs because they do aggregated buying, and so often pay even less. And so they're really not financially viable to service right now in rural upstate New York for that reason. They have access to low-cost hydro. They're paying 4, 5, 6 cents. Solar's just not able to produce power that's financially competitive there. Now, if you want to lease, what we have seen is a municipality, if they want to go through the trouble of writing a very specific RFP that says we want to request for proposals, right, where they have to go through this whole process where they receive bids from companies in order to say, so they have to basically write an RFP that is going to get them to the outcome that they want. And if what they want is a small plot of community shared solar that they're going to receive some lease payment for, then that's great and it can work. And the problem is that you got to go through a competitive bidding process. So Coop Power then has to bid with Cypress Creek and Solar City and all of these other giant companies who have a lot more staff with a lot more time to write a lot more dockets and charts and graphs and go all in on it. So our model is just, so I can do it. We've done municipal bids. It's so much more work to document everything to a T for a municipal audience and to the municipal satisfaction, rather than just saying, let's do this to the satisfaction of 20 people is great. And 20 individual residents, they see what anyway, so private land for that reason is great. So brownfields was the original question. If it's owned by a nonprofit, if it's owned by a defunct corporation, usually brownfields have been abandoned and therefore taken into public ownership. They're often pretty big. The best use for them is to do big solar projects and then to sell it to public entities, which is usually what has happened in Massachusetts. So all that solar then goes to credit municipal meters like schools and like various areas. So that can be done, and a municipality could say, we want you to, here's 10 acres, we want you to build the biggest solar project you can build and give us the best discount on our electricity and sell it to our so that's typically how they do it. But again, it's not even clear that upstate New York right now has the market that is viable for that model, because you need to have higher cost of electricity, basically. And I'm not as much an expert on that. If you call Cypress Creek, they will tell you exactly what they think. So
that is a large-scale commercial build, not a co-op model. Because
right.
basically we have two types of solar models, co-op
Yep.
and PPA. So that brownfield model that a municipality might say, build this, would be a
Right.
PPA type model.
Exactly.
And installers in early, was it June? They were kind enough when we said, I'm sorry, we can't accept your RFP because too many things are still too new in New York.
Right.
But they came out and presented to very many of the same people here. CIR is more of a PPA model.
Yep.
Solar Liberty is more of a co-op model.
Right.
And so it depends on what you're looking for. A co-op model, you buy into, you make more money. A PPA, you get your electricity cheaper, and it's still up. But I don't know if you can
It's a power
own,
purchase agreement.
Yep.
You're
own
just
it.
purchasing the power.
Right.
So the whole reason you can do a PPA, and then this is, so I've done PPAs, and we do PPAs in New York City because we're working with really low-income folks who can't do the upfront outlay. So we do them, and it requires a lot of back-end financing to figure out who's going to finance and own that system if it's not the communities directly. And basically the headache of going through all of that for a PPA for such a low cost of electricity here. Did they say they were going to do a PPA? And what price were they giving?
There is this PPA type model that will be in Erie County very soon.
Okay.
And it will be servicing municipalities. I have no idea what the agreement is, and individual residents. From here, we could sign up to
Right.
purchase it from that particular one. We really want to see
Right.
one in Chautauqua County.
And
We
that'll
want the profit to stay in Chautauqua County.
exactly, and that only works at scale, right? So that is probably at least 10 acres. That's like a very big system. That's like a $7 million solar array that they are getting a big bank basically to finance, and then are selling discounted power out to folks. So that's another model, and it's a great model if you want that kind of flexibility and lower savings. But that's
We want
Yeah.
you to come in. 14 people that I know of, maybe 20.
yeah.
Really, for every reason, want to go solar with the shared.
Yep.
But we're not interested in doing it for the county and for the municipality. We're hoping they'll get on board and find out what they have to do. They have to go to the bid thing. We don't. We can say,
Right.
we like your model.
Right.
If we don't, we might look for a second price, but, we want you to come in and teach us a little more. And I'm so thrilled you're here because you've clarified a great deal. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so we have run well past, so I'm going to just race through the end of my slides and we can call it done. But this is giving you a sense of like what the timeline for building one of these things is. You've got to raise some money. You do environmental permitting, electrical permitting. You buy the solar panels. You build the whole thing. There's a whole bunch of paperwork you do with the utility at the other end of it. And voila, you have a operation approval. This is a little example of the kind of thing we could do, right? So microbrew CSS project, let's say it's 50 kilowatts. Let's say we're able to get down to 260 a watt. So we get the price down from
We
290.
have to have her commercial right now with somebody, one of our installers, so,
Perfect.
yeah.
So,
It's very doable.
so that's totally doable. You can get financing for your participation in the solar array at 3.9% right now in New York State, 10-year loan. Average cost to consumer, if you buy 5 kilowatts, would be $16,000. You can buy it in 1 kilowatt increments. I think I'd prefer if it were 2, but we can talk about it. So basically, take 16,000 divided by 5. Minimum buy-in would probably be about $3,000, and then it would go up depending on matching the number of panels to the amount of electricity that you use over a course of a year. Everybody who participated would give us and me a year of their historical billing, so we could tell you how many panels would zero out your bill, and then you could decide how many fit your budget. So if I tell you that 5 kilowatts is what it's going to take to zero out your bill, then you might say, well, I only want to buy 3 because that's all I have available cash for right now, so I'll do 3 and I'll cover 60% of my bill rather than the full 100%. That's kind of up to you. In this example, it's a 50 kilowatt system. Everybody gets 5. There are 10 folks who participate. Those 10 folks pay in $16,000, and they own their panels directly. I won't get into this, but the genius of the business model is that technically you as a consumer own your panel, and in your purchase agreement, you sign a co-location agreement. So you agree to co-locate panels that you own on a leased property that Co-op Power has leased on your behalf. What that does is legally it allows you to qualify for the federal tax credit. So legally you have to own the equipment in order to get Section 25D residential federal tax credit that counts against standard income that folks make from their job, right? So that is the legal nuance that we go through in order to make sure that that happens. So if you wanted to, you could technically take your panels and walk away with them because you own them. There's no reason you would do that, but legally you can.
You can sell them if you move, right?
Yes, you can sell them if you move. And so that's basically, we would take we give you a calculator for the prorated value of your panels. Every year it goes down, right? So if, say, you're 3 years into your project, you want to sell to another person because you're moving out of state or this or that reason, you can sell them to that person at that prorated value. So basically this is the value you're going to get, and I totally forgot about our 40 cents, which is a really big factor. So the NYSERDA 40 cents, so that's the thing that's missing, right? NYSERDA 40 cents back, so quick calculation.
Down to 220.
Yep.
Was it 260? It would make a difference,
So that would be a couple $1,000s there for everyone. You get the federal tax credit, you get the value that we're going to model for you that you're going to receive over time is going to be 12 cents, and then we assume cost of electricity will go up 2%. Some people do 3 and 4 because they're very aggressive. We do 2. So simple payback, I said 13 years right now. Based on all of that, it's going to go down significantly with that 40 cents from NYSERDA. So I will get you all updated numbers. I was doing kind of a back of the envelope calculation to get you a sense of where we are right now.
One of the impediments to some people buying in the solar residential on the roof was that they had in the state retirement system and don't pay state taxes. So they're not really getting the incentives. So this really it would be a great thing for those who are in the
State
state
employees.
retirement system.
Who still pay federal taxes but not state.
Still pay federal,
Yep.
but no state taxes.
Yep, so this would work great for them. So federal taxes, gotta still have some income there, and then all the rest. So in conclusion, I'm not gonna give you the whole spiel, but you get the idea. We love working with communities and been doing it for 10 years and would love to work with you all if it works for you guys. So thank you so much for having me.